Assistant manager Yoon Sarah had gathered all her office colleagues to make an important announcement. She informed them that she would be resigning from her position due to her upcoming marriage and expressed her gratitude, thanking everyone for everything. Her sudden declaration left the entire office in shock. Many of the colleagues voiced their dismay, telling her that they had grown so close to her over time and that it was truly unfortunate to see her go. They asked her to keep in touch after leaving. Sarah, smiling politely, wished everyone good health and began walking out of the office. Behind her, one of the male colleagues, Inchel, stood frozen, wanting to say something but hesitating. A moment later, he turned back to his desk and resumed work. He started calling clients, explaining that their reservation dates were overlapping and needed adjustment. The flood of calls from the counseling department added to the chaos. Amidst this, the team leader stormed over to him, shouting furiously. She reminded him that she had clearly instructed him to keep the tabs open on the payment form and demanded to know why he couldn't get anything right. Inchel thought to himself that the team leader was nothing short of a psychotic demon. This shouting, this aggressive scolding was nothing new. It was always like this, and the only reason he had managed to endure this toxic work life was because of his one-sided love for assistant manager Yoon Sarah. Now, that very woman had resigned. The team leader snapped him out of his thoughts by ordering everyone to get back to their respective places. It was time to work. But Inchel stopped her and said that he had something to say. She raised an eyebrow and asked if something was wrong. Inchel informed her that he, too, was planning to resign. The team leader reacted with disbelief and frustration, questioning if he was joking. She reminded him that it hadn't even been that long since assistant manager Yoon Sarah left. Standing there quietly, Inchel reflected to himself that the only reason he had joined this company was to see Sarah. But even quitting wouldn't change anything now. He later returned home and sat down with a beer, muttering that the resignation only made his sadness worse. If he had known it would end this way, he thought he should have just confessed his feelings. For an entire year, he had silently watched her, his heart pounding every time he was near her. Was this really love? Surely this was one-sided love. He often questioned whether his feelings for her had ever been real. One evening, he found himself sitting at a restaurant with a friend, recounting the same story yet again. His friend, clearly tired of hearing it, asked how many times Inchel was going to repeat the same tale. He pointed out bluntly that Inchel had never even dated her. Inchel's thoughts drifted again to a moment he had fantasized about many times. He imagined a scenario in which they were alone together, working overtime, and he would confess to her while offering her something meaningful. That fantasy sparked a memory from the past. In a flashback, Inchel recalled a day at work when he had approached assistant manager Yoon Sarah with the intention of confessing. He had started by telling her that she must be exhausted from working overtime. As he offered her a drink, he said she should enjoy it while she worked. Sarah responded warmly, saying he didn't have to bring it, but she appreciated it and would enjoy it. At that moment, Inchel had felt it was the perfect opportunity to confess. His heart was pounding, but just as he was about to speak, he panicked and changed the subject, blurting out that he needed to organize a list and had to leave. He turned and walked away, kicking himself internally. Back in the present, he sat in his room, still feeling weighed down by depression. Then suddenly, a message popped up on his phone. It was from Yoon Sarah, a private message completely out of the blue. He stared at the screen, surprised. She wrote that she had heard he quit the company too. She also expressed her gratitude toward him, saying that if it weren't for him, enduring her time at the company would have been incredibly difficult. She told him that, though he may not have known it, he had been like a beacon of light for her during that time. She added that, although they might not meet again, she wished him happiness. Reading those words, Inchel sat in stunned silence. A beacon of light. He wondered what exactly about him made her feel that way. He couldn't recall even having a proper conversation with her. And what did she mean by, "We cannot meet anymore"? The message left him with a swirl of emotions, questions, and a bittersweet ache for a connection that might have been, but never was. Inchel had gone to visit a priestess to explain everything that had been happening. But instead of giving him the clarity he was seeking, the priestess immediately began shouting at him. She scolded him loudly, asking if he had come all the way just to tell her that he had quit his job. She demanded if he even understood what he had done. Bewildered and confused, Inchel could only stare at her in disbelief, wondering what exactly she was talking about. He told her that he hadn't come to report his resignation. He simply wanted to understand what Sarah meant by her message. He explained that none of it made any sense to him unless someone spelled it out. But the priestess seemed even more frustrated, exclaiming that he had no idea what was truly happening. She declared that the company he worked at was filled with a heavy cloud of energy, and that his presence there had been essential. That made no sense to Inchel. Internally, he wondered what she was going on about. Out loud, he replied with a hesitant voice, telling her she must be misunderstanding the situation. After all, he was just a travel agent. But the priestess, unbothered by his confusion, closed her eyes and began murmuring mysteriously. She claimed there was a spider present, a symbolic one. She said that his appearance at the company had been a divine blessing from the skies, and now that he had failed to act in time, there would be no way out. Her tone turned grave as she declared that one of the women would die soon. As she continued performing some kind of ritual or magic, Inchel stood in stunned silence. He nervously asked who she meant, who was going to die, but she abruptly stopped him, insisting that he keep quiet and let her finish. According to her, the gods had spoken. There was still some fortune left in Sarah's destiny from her past life. That meant there was still one more chance for him. Without warning, the priestess smacked him across the head with the hand fan she had been holding. Inchel recoiled, clutching his head, and asked why she had hit him so suddenly. She casually responded that she had given him some spiritual energy and instructed him to make the most of it this time. Later that night, Inchel returned to his house and lay in bed, unable to sleep. Although the blow to his head hadn't really hurt, the strange sensation it left behind wouldn't go away. He couldn't shake the feeling. He had gone to see the priestess because he had heard she was renowned, but all she had done was mutter bizarre things about energy clouds and spiders. What was there to figure out now, anyway? Everything was already over. Resigned to his thoughts, he closed his eyes and decided to try sleeping. But just as he was drifting off, something strange happened. A flicker of odd lighting, or was it energy, seemed to come from the ceiling above him. He opened his eyes, puzzled. Something didn't seem right. He looked around the room and realized that it wasn't quite the room he had fallen asleep in. Somehow, the coffee pot he had thrown away years ago was back in its usual spot. The old wardrobe, which he had clearly gotten rid of, was standing right there. Everything looked exactly like his room from 3 years ago. His confusion deepened when he checked his phone. It wasn't his current phone. It was the old one he had used 3 years ago. More shockingly, the date on the screen matched his very first day at the company. He shut his eyes again, trying to make sense of it all, muttering that this had to be some kind of dream. But when he opened them again and saw the unchanged surroundings, something in him shifted. He sat up straight and murmured to himself, realizing that even if it was a dream, this was his chance. If it truly was the day he had joined the company, then it was also the day he would see Sarah again. With that thought burning in his chest, he sprang into action. He got ready as quickly as he could and rushed out toward the office, heart pounding with anticipation. He kept repeating to himself that if this really was his first day again, if time had truly turned back, then this was his opportunity to see her once more. And when he finally arrived at the office, there she was, Sarah, just like before. He stood before her, barely able to contain his excitement, overwhelmed by the surreal moment of being able to meet her all over again. Inchel greeted her with a polite smile, saying, "Good morning, Sarah Sasai." But Sarah looked at him strangely, her expression cautious and puzzled, as she asked whether she knew him or if he was mistaking her for someone else. It was at that moment Inchel realized that, of course, she didn't recognize him yet. To her, he was a stranger because from her perspective they were meeting for the first time. Trying to recover quickly, Inchel began to explain himself. He told her that before joining the company, he had taken time to memorize the names of all the employees in Team 1. He introduced himself as Bang Inchel, the new hire who would be starting work that day. Sarah responded with a neutral tone, acknowledging that he must be the new employee they were expecting. Just then, another woman approached them. Her name was Huang Sui. She walked up to Sarah and asked whether she had arrived, then curiously inquired who the person standing next to her was. Sarah replied that the man beside her was a new hire on their team and encouraged Sui to support him well. Sui replied obediently, addressing Sarah as Chief, and then turned her attention to Inchel. Sui tilted her head slightly and noted that it was a bit odd. Usually, new hires were introduced by the manager. Inchel felt embarrassed, realizing that he might have overstepped. He thought to himself that of course Sarah would be weirded out if someone she didn't know acted overly familiar. He may have misjudged how to approach her in this altered timeline. Nonetheless, Sui offered to introduce herself before anyone else. She told him that her name was Huang Sui, and that she had joined the company about 6 months ago. She added that she would soon be promoted to the position of advisor. As she led him inside the office, she explained that although people often thought a travel agency would be laid back and carefree, she took the relationship between supervisors and subordinates very seriously, and she expected the same from him. She confirmed his name again, and then said she would begin introducing him to the rest of the office. Sui gave him a heads up, warning that the company had a large number of female employees, and it would be risky for him if he approached any of them with questionable intentions. Inchel nodded in agreement, though internally, he was surprised by how assertive Sui was acting toward him on his very first day, especially since, in the timeline he remembered, she had only been working there for 6 months. She began the introductions by pointing to a woman and saying that this was assistant manager Su Yeju, the person in charge of planning all the company trips. Yeju gave him a quick, dry glance and commented that he must be the new hire. Without waiting for a response, she added that she was a bit busy and then walked away. Inchel noted to himself that Yeju hadn't changed at all. Still blunt and unbothered, just as he remembered. Sui also remarked that assistant manager Su was always busy. As Inchel continued scanning the office, he found himself thinking that this truly was the same team one he had worked with for 3 years. The familiarity was uncanny. Then, Yoon Sarah formally introduced herself. She told him that she was the head of marketing and that her name was Chief Yoon Sarah. She greeted him briefly while still working on her computer, her eyes barely leaving the screen. Sui turned to her and remarked that she seemed especially busy that day. Inchel, however, noticed something that troubled him. Sarah had greeted him without even making eye contact. That wasn't like her. Even in a dream, it felt off. But then he remembered what the priestess had told him. The gods had said there was still some good fortune from her previous life, and that he had been given another chance. He wondered if this was it. Was this the second chance the priestess had mentioned? If so, he resolved to do his best. He nodded slightly to himself, muttering that it was time to try again, and this time he'd do better. Later, during lunch, he went to Sarah's office carrying a drink. She looked exhausted and asked him what it was. He replied that it was a vanilla latte, her favorite. He remembered clearly that she used to enjoy drinking them. He gently encouraged her to drink it, saying it might help ease her fatigue. Internally, he hoped this small gesture would leave a positive impression on her, but her response wasn't what he expected. She stared at the cup and told him to take it back. Startled, he asked her what she meant. Her voice rose as she firmly repeated her words, demanding that he take the drink back immediately. Embarrassed and confused, he grabbed the mug again and apologized, his mind spinning. That was not the reaction he had anticipated. Unbeknownst to him, Sarah stood there processing the moment. A question stirred in her mind. How had he known she liked vanilla lattes? Meanwhile, Sui had been watching the entire interaction from a distance. Irritated, she thought to herself how unfair it seemed. She was the one who had been teaching him how to work all day, yet he brought coffee to the chief instead. Walking up to him, Sui instructed Inchel to open Excel. He looked at her blankly and asked what she meant. She repeated herself more firmly this time, telling him to open Excel. There were long lists to manage and plenty of work that required using the software. She added that the new price tables for the vacation packages had just arrived, and it was time to organize them. Inchel got to work immediately, collecting the data and editing the charts. After a while, he asked if there was anything else he needed to do. Watching him work, Sui grew visibly confused. She hadn't expected him to be this skilled. In fact, she found herself wondering how he was even better than her. Sui told Inchel that he didn't need to do anything else for the time being. It seemed like he was quite good at his work. Hearing that, Inchel thought to himself with a slight smirk that of course he was good at it. She had nagged him about Excel for 3 whole years in the past, so it was only natural that he had mastered it by now. Still, Sui wasn't entirely ready to shower him with praise. She warned him not to get too satisfied just because he had handled one task well. He responded respectfully with a yes, Sunbae. She then reminded him that there would be a company dinner that night, a welcome party for the new hires, and he had to attend and join the rest of the team. He nodded enthusiastically, visibly excited. Later that night, the entire office team was gathered around a long dinner table, plates of food and bottles of soju spread out across it. Everyone was enjoying themselves. Inchel, ever mindful, offered pork cheek to the department head and told him it was something he liked. The department head chuckled in surprise, asking how the new hire knew his preference. Inchel responded smoothly, saying that pork cheek was a signature food of the area, and a man like the department head would naturally be familiar with the local delicacies. The older man laughed, clearly impressed with Inchel's attentiveness. Watching the exchange, Sui thought to herself that she really liked this guy. She hoped Inchel would stay with the company for a long time. In her mind, he wasn't just a diligent worker. He also had a way of reading the room, setting the mood, and making everyone feel comfortable. At one point during the dinner, Inchel offered a glass of soju to Sui, encouraging her to have a drink. He mentioned that she preferred soju over beer. She looked at him in confusion, asking how he knew that, especially when it was their first day meeting each other. It didn't make sense to her. Internally, Inchel panicked a little, realizing he had slipped. He thought she was close to figuring out something was off. But outwardly, he kept his composure and told her that he'd simply noticed she hadn't touched the beer all night. So he made a guess. Then he quickly shifted the topic, saying that it wasn't important at the moment. They should just enjoy a drink as co-workers. The table erupted into cheerful chatter as they clinked glasses and continued drinking. Sui kept glancing at Inchel, her curiosity deepening. To her, he was an intriguing person. Someone who seemed clumsy at first glance, the type who might take a while to adjust. But he turned out to be a highly diligent worker who handled everything effortlessly. In fact, around people, he became a completely different person. She couldn't help but feel a growing interest in him. Meanwhile, Inchel felt a quiet satisfaction as he observed the warm and lively atmosphere around the table. Those 3 years he had previously spent in the company weren't wasted after all. Creating this kind of mood now came naturally to him. Encouraged by his success so far, he thought that he would now smoothly make his way over to sit beside Sarah and speak with her. But before he could, Sarah stood up from her seat and addressed the department head, informing him that she would be leaving first. Inchel's heart sank in a wave of panic. This wasn't what he had expected. He silently thought to himself that she couldn't just leave like that. The department head checked his watch, agreed that it was getting late, and told Chief Yoon to get back home safely. He thanked her for the enjoyable meal they had shared. Sarah smiled and said goodbye to everyone, promising to see them the next day. With that, she left. Inchel remained seated, stunned and a bit disappointed that Sarah had left so early. He thought to himself that he hadn't even gotten the chance to say a single word to her. Everything he prepared and hoped for seemed to fall flat in that moment. He continued engaging with the team, offering drinks and trying to keep up the cheerful mood. He presented another glass to the department head, but he couldn't help but think to himself that the department head's favorite wasn't Sui. It was clearly Sarah. His mind wandered again, filled with frustration. One of the co-workers turned to Inchel and asked if he was any good at singing. The question embarrassed him, catching him off guard. He gave a nervous smile, unsure how to respond. 3 hours later, the dinner was wrapping up. Inchel stood up and began saying his goodbyes to everyone. He made sure to respectfully address the department head, wishing him a safe journey home, and told everyone he'd see them again tomorrow. After his polite farewells, he found himself walking alone. Everyone else had either left or was gathering their things. Only Sui remained behind with him. He turned to her and said softly, "Sunbae, I'll be heading out now." He began walking away, feeling a weight of disappointment in his chest. After everything he'd done that evening, he hadn't managed to exchange even a single meaningful word with Sarah. All that effort, and it still felt like nothing had changed. But then, just as he was about to leave, Sui called out to him. She told him that they hadn't had a proper chance to talk yet. She suggested that the two of them go for another round of drinks together. Hearing that, Inchel stopped in his tracks, startled. Her words caught him completely off guard. He stood there, surprised, trying to make sense of what she really meant by that. Inchel agreed to the invitation, and the two of them headed to a quiet bar nearby for another round of drinks. As they settled into their seats, Sui raised her glass with a relaxed smile, remarking that drinks like "Yes, like a cloud" were always the best. Inchel, sitting across from her, watched her with quiet curiosity. He analyzed the moment in disbelief. Was this really Hwang Sui being so easygoing and open? It felt strangely different from the person he had known for years. After they clinked glasses, she picked up the bottle again and offered to pour the next round, saying it was her turn now. He blinked, still surprised by how casual everything felt. But before he could say anything, she told him to stop. He immediately asked what she meant, apologizing without understanding what had gone wrong. Sui let out a soft sigh and told him that since they were the same age, he didn't need to speak to her so formally or distant. She encouraged him to speak comfortably with her and not act so cold. Inchel thought to himself that this side of her so open and approachable was something he never would have imagined. She continued, telling him that if he was going to be part of the company, he should start behaving like a real team member. She reminded him again to stop speaking so stiffly. He nodded quickly, correcting himself mid-sentence from, "Yes, Sunbae," to a more casual, "All right." Sui poured him another drink and added, with a tinge of emotion, that if he was going to join the team, he should have come earlier. Her voice softened as she shared a bit of her own experience, how hard it had been for her when she first started. She admitted that it had been lonely, especially since there was no one around her age to talk to freely. Listening to her speak so honestly made Inchel view her in a different light. For the first time, he wondered whether, if he had made an effort to approach her more actively in the past, they might have gotten along better. The thought lingered with him as he looked at her across the table. Still, he smiled and raised his glass again, saying that what mattered now was the present. They were there together, so they should enjoy the drink. They both cheered and clinked their glasses, sharing a quiet moment of warmth in the noisy bar. After several drinks, the two of them stepped out into the cold night air. Inchel wrapped his coat tighter and commented on how chilly it had gotten. Then he asked about the bill, wondering how much it had come to. Sui brushed it off with a smile, telling him it was around $50, but she had already paid. Since she was his Sunbae, it was only natural for her to take care of it, at least this much. Rather than heading home right away, she suggested they take a short walk to sober up a little before parting ways. He agreed, and the two of them wandered quietly together under the streetlights. At first, Inchel believed they were simply taking a stroll around the neighborhood or through a nearby park. But as time passed, he found himself blinking in disbelief. Somehow, their walk had ended with both of them standing in front of a motel. The situation had unfolded so unexpectedly, it barely felt real. Even once they were inside, he couldn't quite process what was happening. His thoughts raced. He never imagined this would be possible. He was now alone with Hwang Sui, in a setting that felt almost surreal. Sui, slightly tipsy and speaking freely, started teasing him gently. She complained that he was the one who had made her start thinking about the yoga sessions. Her words were disjointed and playful, but carried an unmistakable tension. She muttered that she didn't understand why she was acting like this earlier in the evening. She had been composed, but now it felt different. Inchel sat beside her, trying to keep up with the whirlwind of the moment. He kept thinking to himself that this couldn't be real. Despite his lack of experience, he was now in this unexpected situation, and with none other than Sui. She mentioned that it would be embarrassing if she was the only one trying to lead the yoga session, nudging him to join her too. Inchel looked flustered, admitting quietly that it was actually his first time doing yoga. That surprised her. She turned to him with wide eyes and asked if he was serious. She had assumed, based on the way he carried himself earlier, that he was familiar with it, maybe even experienced. She confessed that she had been genuinely impressed and had thought he dated a number of women before. Laughing at her own misunderstanding, she muttered that this was insane. What was she doing here with someone so innocent? But after a pause, she added that since things had already gone this far, she couldn't let it end awkwardly. Inchel smiled faintly and said that he was happy to be joining her for the session. Despite the bizarre circumstances, both of them seemed to find comfort in each other's company. Their connection felt genuine, and for a fleeting moment, they let themselves enjoy the unexpected bond that had formed between them. During the game, Inchel turned to her and asked softly if he had done something wrong. Sui responded with a teasing tone, telling him that yes, he had done something very wrong. But since she was enjoying playing the game with him, she would let it slide and forgive him. After the game ended, the two of them began drinking together. Inchel remarked that the drinks at the motel were surprisingly good. As she watched him sipping her favorite drink, she couldn't help but protest. She told him to stop drinking it, saying that she had wanted to drink that one herself. Half joking and half exhausted, she told him to come lie down and hand the drink over, adding that she didn't have any more strength left in her body. Inchel glanced at her, uncertain. He wasn't sure if, at that moment, he was supposed to hold her or simply stay where he was. She appeared to want more comfort, more ease, as if she were slowly letting her guard down. Curious, she shifted the conversation and asked him something that had been on her mind. More importantly, how had he started working at their company? He replied casually, confirming that it was indeed Zoe Travel Agency. He explained that he wasn't entirely sure how it happened, He had simply submitted his resume and been accepted almost immediately. He admitted that he found it rather strange himself, since his qualifications weren't particularly impressive. Puzzled him. As he thought about it more, Inchel realized something. This was the first time he had ever shared such a personal conversation with Sui, despite having known her for nearly 3 years. That thought lingered in his mind as he turned the question back to her, asking how she had ended up at the same company. She answered lightly, saying it was nothing special, just something along the lines of a special employment route. That response surprised him. He looked at her and asked with disbelief if she had been scouted. That, to him, sounded incredible. She brushed it off, saying it was nothing and that things had simply turned out that way. He then commented that if he thought about it, there were a lot of strange things about their company. There weren't many employees, yet they operated out of a huge building, and the internet connection there was exceptionally good. Sui seemed caught off guard by that observation and looked at him curiously. She asked how he could know all that on his first day at work. He immediately grew flustered and tried to explain himself, insisting that it wasn't what it sounded like. He clarified that he was merely saying the company seemed nice. He didn't actually know anything for sure. Laughing awkwardly, he tried to ease the tension. Inchel smiled and suggested they play another round of the game. Sui blinked and asked if she wasn't already tired after just finishing a session. But she seemed excited, and with a grin, he admitted that he wanted to try playing more too. Sui could hardly believe what she had just heard. He genuinely wanted to play more games, despite the fact that they had already played quite a lot. She reminded herself that it was still only the first day since they had met under these circumstances. Her thoughts began to drift, tangled with confusion and curiosity, when Inchel suddenly said, almost as if reading her mind, that he knew it was impossible, right? She hesitated before responding, asking him to wait a moment and let her think. But in the pause that followed, her mind wandered again. After all, wasn't she the one who had been the most eager to try out all the games earlier? Her own excitement had started everything. Inchel, puzzled by her reaction, asked what she was even trying to say. Meanwhile, he found himself overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation. He thought to himself that this couldn't be real. It felt too dreamlike. There was no way something like this could happen again. A quiet conviction crept into his thoughts. Everything would return to normal once he woke up. It would be his familiar room again, just as always. Eventually, he drifted off to sleep, convinced it was all just a strange dream. But when morning came and he opened his eyes, he was stunned to find that he was still in the motel room, not at home. Panic slowly set in. His mind raced with confusion. Was he seriously still in the same motel from the day before? Nothing made sense. He wondered aloud what had happened and whether this wasn't all supposed to be a dream. But if it wasn't a dream, then what was it? He began searching the area frantically, looking around for Sui. Her absence puzzled him even more. Where had she gone? Picking up his phone, he considered the possibility that this might truly be his reality now. And if that were the case, he figured he'd better get going, to work. Determined to make sense of it all, he quickly got ready and headed to the company. Upon arriving, he saw Sui there, and her outfit was exactly the same as it had been the previous day. That single detail hit him hard. It confirmed everything. They had actually done a yoga session together. It wasn't a hallucination. Approaching her with hesitation, he asked if she had left first the night before. Sui, keeping her professional demeanor, reminded him that they were at work now and that he should speak more respectfully. Without giving him a chance to respond, she turned and walked away. Inchel stood frozen for a moment, bewildered. What had just happened? Had he said something wrong? Or was it just because they were in the office now where things had to be more formal? Still trying to wrap his head around the strangeness of it all, he muttered to himself that this definitely wasn't a dream. Nothing made sense, and the only conclusion he could draw was that he had somehow traveled 3 years back in time. Then, like a sudden jolt, another realization struck him. If this truly was his new reality, then did that mean he had a chance to get closer to Sarah? With that thought, he turned and began walking toward her. Sarah was sitting calmly at her desk, focused on her work. Inchel found himself struggling with yet another dilemma. This time, it involved Hwang Sui. He kept thinking about how he had gotten involved with her, how they had done yoga together just the day before. It had been his first experience doing something like that, and while it had left an impression on him, his heart still firmly belonged to Sarah, the woman he had always loved. Torn between the two, he asked himself what he was supposed to do now. Could he really just go out with Sui? But ignoring her entirely didn't feel right either. Still, if he pursued anything with Sui, he feared it might be over with Sarah.